I want to provide some takeaways from a Christian perspective on this fantastic little book, A Concise History of Western Philosophy from Platonism to Nihilism by Mark Anderson. So Edward Fazer, a Catholic philosopher, recommended this a couple months ago on Twitter or X. And once I saw how short it is, I knew I had to buy it and read it. So Anderson, in this book, Dr. Anderson, instead of covering all of philosophy, focuses on the core concepts. So to give you a flavor of that, let me read a bit from the preface. So this little book is organized around the theme of being and becoming, which terms function in philosophy as shorthand for two opposed worldviews. So let me read something from Plato and then from Nietzsche. So Plato is said to be the premier philosopher of being, whereas Nietzsche is the advocate for becoming. So Plato says that the idea of the good is the cause of all that is upright and beautiful in all things, generating in the visible realm both light and the source of light, and in the intelligible realm, it itself is the source producing truth and understanding. Anyone who would act prudently, either in private or in public, must behold this good. So that sounds really important, right? Now, conversely, Nietzsche writes, if the doctrines of sovereign becoming, of the fluidity of all concepts, types, and kinds, of the lack of any cardinal difference between man and animal, doctrines which I take to be true, but deadly, are flung at the people for one more generation in the current mania for education, then let no one be surprised if that people perishes of pettiness and misery, of ossification and selfishness. That is, if to begin with, it disintegrates and ceases to be a people. And then concluding, he gives basically a quick history. Belief in being, or what Plato was presenting, gradually declined in the era spanning the late medieval and early modern periods. It fell further and faster during the later phases of the scientific revolution and then the Enlightenment. And by the 19th century, the advent of becoming was at hand. And finishing today, there's more or less general agreement, if not in theory, at least in practice. Being is indeed a fiction. God is dead, and nothing remains but the ceaselessly shifting current of the river of becoming, nihilism riding on the waves. Now, if you were struck by the Nietzsche quote, that sounds like a disaster, doesn't it? Which is why wrestling with the ideas in this book and learning how to engage with them, combat them, is so essential, and hence why I'm making this video. So I'm not going to be able to summarize the core ideas of philosophy in 2 or 3 paragraphs, but I think the best way to get at these ideas is maybe to start with becoming. So just imagine a universe with an infinite number of particles or atoms kind of moving through space, interacting with things, changing, always in flux, but with nothing behind that, and then build a worldview from that. So that's becoming. And that's what I just said is won the war, or at least the battle. And then we have being. So we humans tend to see patterns. So I'm looking out the window and I see a tree, and I see another tree, and I see similarities. And I notice that there's some like tree-ishness to that, or I've got my cats, and they seem, yes, they're individuals, but there seems to be a common element. And then I see that there's cause and effect. There seems to be beauty, there seems to be truth, there seems to be science, and so on. So that's being. And then from that, we kind of go deeper into like the one source of all those things, which from a Christian perspective is God. And then we build a worldview from that. So that's being and becoming really quickly. In this book, what Anderson does is he starts out with like Hinduism, which has like pure oneness, and then he has the pre-Socratics. So there's Parmenides, who is on the being side, like absolute being, and then contrast, there's Heraclitus, who is pure becoming. So these ideas are very ancient. This is something that humans have wrestled with for thousands of years. So next we have Plato, which Dr. Anderson spends several chapters on, who's, as I said, the premier philosopher of being, followed by Aristotle, who took it in a slightly different direction with the core ideas. And then we have Plotinus, who was kind of a mystical Platonist, so to speak. And then we have the Christians with St. Augustine and St. Thomas Aquinas, Aquinas being like the ultimate expositor of being, who was able to synthesize all of reality into this worldview. So let me read you a bit to conclude the being section. So the real is God as the active existence. The true is God is known. The good, God is desired. The beautiful is God is admired. So everything has its place in the divine order, including us. And if we hope to be blessed with good lives, we'll have to conform ourselves to the design specifications inscribed in our essences, which in this case means that we should strive to respect the real, believe the true, desire the good, and admire the beautiful. We should, in short, love God. So that's kind of the culmination of worldview as being. And then there's the dark turn at the conclusion of the Aquinas chapter. But you wonder, what if there are no essences? Yes, well, that's a serious matter, and it's the thought that there are no essences, no natures of things, and therefore no teleology, nor any measure of the real, the true, the good, and the beautiful, apart from human subjectivity. This thought is the womb in which modernity foully gestated an obscene fetus, a monstrous birth, an organism evolving, maturing, creeping inevitably towards its gloomy telos, nihilism. As far as I can tell, Dr. Anderson is a nihilist, so kudos for him for stating it so bluntly. Now we come to the modern section of the book. The first chapter covers William of Ockham, who was a Christian philosopher in the early 1300s. So Ockham thought that the synthesis created by someone like St. Thomas Aquinas placed too many limits on God's freedom and power. So there's an ominous footnote that Anderson writes, and here the West takes a turn that will lead eventually to Nietzsche. So with the loss of universals, we lose the ability to make inferences, to do science, to have objective good truth. There's just kind of the will of the sovereign. So you can see like Hobbes in this, where God is free to do whatever he wants because he's God, right? So next we have Descartes, who again was a Christian philosopher. So he was trying to answer the skeptics, and he kind of went all the way down that road to try to prove existence and ultimately God. So you might have heard, I think, therefore I am. So that was Descartes' solution. Because he was able to question his existence, he must exist. But he was never able to crawl back out. So he ended up separating his mind from everything outside his mind. And so there's mind in here and matter out there. And so you might have heard of the idea of the brain and of that, just receiving impulses and creating a world from that. So this led to some radical things. So if you lean into the matter side of Cartesian dualism, you get scientific materialism. And if you lean into mind, you get subjectivism and skepticism. The following chapters are on human Kant, which I'm not going to really cover. But essentially they play this to the extremes. So you lose causation, you lose science, you lose reason. And then from there you go to Nietzsche, who denied seemingly existence itself, being itself. There's a chapter called Psychological Nihilism, and some points he makes, Anderson makes, are 1, becoming aims at nothing. 2, there's the loss of the feeling of being at home in the universe. And 3, there's the loss of a hope for a better world. And so in the Nietzschean nihilist tradition, there's this idea that you need to be very courageous and brave and really embrace these ideas. But as a Christian, they just seem wrong. I don't know why you would go there. So to conclude the book itself, before I get to the takeaways, I wanted to cover the chapter Being and Becoming, chapter 23. He kind of gives you a historical overview. So the start of the modern era, which we can date to roughly 1500, marks the moment being began to collapse into becoming. Its foundations had been undermined by thinkers like Occam, And he mentions the Renaissance and the humanists who attacked the scholastics. And then there's the Reformation, which undermined clerical authority, the new science, and on until you get to someone like a Nietzsche. And then in the 20th century, interestingly, on page 135, he writes, "And deify it we have," meaning the world. Indeed, this seems to have been the chief intellectual project of the 20th century. Wherever a lingering trace of being is detected, it's targeted and attacked. Wow. Okay, so a couple takeaways from this book and a couple questions as well. The first takeaway is that war is constant in this life. I just read about, the 20th century being about the battle against being, reality. And I suppose if you're an Orthodox Christian, you're aware of the idea of the world, the flesh, and the devil. But I don't think we Christians make it concrete enough. So I've studied politics over the last 10 years, and what you see is that there's always these forces attacking what I, as a Christian, would consider to be the good and the true and the beautiful. That's just an ongoing battle that the powers that be are having constantly for centuries. There's always this battle, and we need to be aware of that and engage however we can in that. And something that struck me from the book is that all these ideas existed in Plato's day, but Plato and Aristotle won that battle in their day. And there's several pages on Augustine's battle with skeptics, but Augustine won the battle in his day. But we in the West have lost the battle, and it was lost a long time ago. It was lost before my grandparents were born. And so we have our work cut out for us, actually, but the start is just to be aware of these ideas and to be aware that you're in a battle. Now, a question I've got is, did these modern ideas win the debate? Or did they simply replace the ideas, the synthesis that Aquinas had come to? I would love to find a book on like a Christian argument against skepticism. I think that would be really useful. Another question I've got is, like, how much of this content do believers need to know? Like the average Christian, how much of this information do they need? It seems to me the average Christian should be able to provide like a rational defense of faith itself to the sort of skeptical person that they're likely to encounter, but I don't know how deep we should be going. Like, you'll notice I skipped quickly over Hume and Kant and Nietzsche just because I'm not particularly interested in them. It seems like they took the wrong road really hard, and I don't know what the point of studying them would be, but I don't know, it's just a question. And I think the last takeaway, which I haven't even mentioned, is happiness. The ancients defined happiness very differently than we do, because they had these foundational ideas of the good and the true and the beautiful. And so when you read the word happiness in like Aristotle, he was actually referring to something else, something different than what we mean. So I think to wrap up this video, I want to focus in on this. So there's the subjective level. So I get a raise at work. I enjoy a nice bottle of wine with friends or my wife, and so I feel happy. So that's the lowest level of happiness, and that's what we mean by the word. But maybe I cheated to get my raise, or I stole the bottle of wine or whatever, so the ancients wouldn't have said I was happy. What they meant by happiness was having a good soul, and not just in the moment, but over the course of your life and ending well. That was to be what it meant to be happy. And then the highest level of happiness was beatitude. So let me find from the Aquinas chapter, the beatific vision. This is knowledge of God's essence, unmediated by the body or any distorting modes of cognition. It's the direct apprehension of God through which the souls of the virtuous attain perfect blessedness. So I want to conclude this video by just urging you to aim for the higher levels of happiness and do what you can to help others aim for them. and not to stay on this kind of low subjective level. But because we as Christians believe in the true, the good, and the beautiful, we can have faith to maybe sacrifice the lower levels, subjective levels of happiness, and aim for ultimate blessedness in our lives and help others to do so. God bless.